Veteran fell into abandoned mine. Dog guided him to forgotten war tunnel. Prepare yourself for one of the most incredible survival stories you'll ever witness. Today, we're sharing the extraordinary tale of a veteran who fell into what seemed like certain death in an abandoned mine, only to discover that his loyal companion would lead him through the darkness to uncover secrets that had been buried for over 70 years. This is a story of courage, loyalty, and discoveries that will change everything you thought you knew about hidden wartime history. If you're ready for an adventure that will keep you on the edge of your seat, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to our channel, and hit the notification bell, because what this veteran and his dog found in those forgotten tunnels will absolutely blow your mind. The morning fog hung thick over the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia, shrouding the abandoned mining operations that had once been the lifeblood of Blackwater County. Tom Mitchell stood at the edge of what locals called Devil's Hollow, a sprawling area of collapsed mine shafts and rusted equipment that had been left to rot when the coal company pulled out 15 years ago. At 48, Tom carried himself with the measured gait of a man whose left leg had been rebuilt with titanium and steel after an IED explosion in Iraq, but his grey eyes still held the sharp awareness of a soldier who had learned to read danger in every shadow. The morning air was crisp with the promise of autumn, carrying the scent of dying leaves and the metallic tang of rusted mining equipment. Tom pulled his worn military surplus jacket tighter around his shoulders as he surveyed the desolate landscape before him. The remnants of the old Blackwater Mining Company stretched across the valley like the bones of some massive prehistoric creature, all twisted metal and concrete foundations slowly being reclaimed by the relentless advance of mountain vegetation. Beside him, his 4-year-old Belgian Malinois named Scout pressed close against his leg, the dog's amber eyes scanning the treacherous terrain with the same vigilance that had kept them both alive during 2 tours in the Middle East. Scout had been Tom's military working dog, a bomb detection specialist whose nose had saved countless lives before a Taliban mortar attack had ended both their military careers. The explosion that had shattered Tom's leg had also left Scout with nerve damage that ended his military service, though it hadn't diminished the dog's fierce loyalty or protective instincts. Now they were inseparable companions, 2 damaged veterans trying to find their place in a world that seemed to have little use for their hard-earned skills. Tom's disability pension barely covered the rent on his small apartment in Charleston, and the civilian job market had proven frustratingly indifferent to the specialized skills he had learned during 8 years of military service. Bomb disposal and urban warfare tactics weren't exactly in high demand in the peaceful mountains of West Virginia. Tom had come to Devil's Hollow following a lead from his therapist at the VA hospital in Charleston. Dr. Sarah Martinez had suggested that exploring the abandoned mining areas might help him process his feelings about underground spaces, part of his ongoing treatment for the claustrophobia and panic attacks that had plagued him since his injury. The irony wasn't lost on Tom that he was trying to overcome his fear of confined spaces by deliberately seeking them out, but Dr. Martinez had insisted that controlled exposure was often the key to healing. The old mining road was barely more than a dirt track now, overgrown with kudzu and mountain laurel that had reclaimed the industrial scars. Tom moved carefully, testing each step with his walking stick as he navigated around the rusted hulks of abandoned equipment. The walking stick was carved from mountain ash, a gift from his grandfather who had worked these very mines during the 1960s before black lung disease had forced him into early retirement. The old man had died while Tom was overseas, leaving behind only memories and a few treasured stories about the mountain's history. Warning signs in faded red letters proclaimed danger, unstable ground, and authorized personnel only, but the chain-link fences had long since been cut by scavengers and thrill-seekers. Tom had seen similar scenes in Iraq and Afghanistan, where the detritus of war had been left to decay in the desert sun. There was something universally depressing about abandoned industrial sites, regardless of whether they had been destroyed by economic forces or enemy action. Scout ranged ahead, his nose working overtime as he processed the complex scent picture of the abandoned site. The dog's tail was up and alert, but not rigid with the tension that would indicate immediate danger. Tom had learned to read his partner's body language like a second language, and Scout's current posture suggested curiosity rather than concern. After years of detecting improvised explosive devices and hidden weapons caches, an abandoned mining site probably seemed refreshingly straightforward to the Belgian Malinois. The sound of Tom's phone buzzing broke the mountain silence. He pulled it from his pocket and saw a text from his sister Beth in Pittsburgh. "How's the therapy hike going? Remember what Dr. Martinez said about taking it slow? Call me when you get back to civilization." Tom smiled despite himself. Beth had been his anchor during the darkest days after his injury, flying down to the VA hospital whenever he needed support, and never once making him feel like a burden. She was a successful architect now, married with 2 kids, but she still worried about her little brother, who had come home from the war, broken in ways that weren't always visible. As he typed back a reassuring response, Tom failed to notice that Scout had stopped moving. The dog was standing perfectly still about 20 yards ahead, his head tilted in the way that meant he was processing something unusual. When Tom looked up from his phone, he saw Scout backing away from what appeared to be solid ground covered in fallen leaves and decades of accumulated debris. The area looked innocuous enough, just another section of the valley floor where nature was slowly erasing the evidence of human industry. But Scout's behavior triggered alarm bells in Tom's mind. During their military service, the dog had never given a false alarm, never failed to detect a genuine threat. If Scout was warning him about this particular patch of ground, there was definitely something wrong with it. "What is it, boy?" Tom called, but even as the words left his mouth, he heard the ominous creak of rotting timber beneath his feet. The old mine shaft had been covered with wooden planks decades ago, but time and weather had weakened the structure until it was little more than a death trap waiting for an unwary visitor. The sound was eerily similar to the groaning of stressed building materials that Tom had learned to recognize during urban combat operations. Tom had just enough time to register Scout's warning bark before the ground gave way beneath him. The sensation of falling brought back every nightmare from his injury in Iraq, the moment when the world exploded around him and gravity became his enemy. He crashed through rotting wood and rusted metal supports, his walking stick spinning away into the darkness as he desperately tried to grab onto something, anything that might stop his descent. The wooden planks that had once sealed the mine shaft splintered like matchsticks under his weight, sending him tumbling through layers of debris that had accumulated over the decades. He hit a steel support beam with his shoulder, the impact spinning him around and driving the air from his lungs. Then he was falling again, through what felt like empty space, with only the distant sound of Scout's frantic barking to orient him in the darkness. The fall seemed to last forever, though Tom's military training told him it was probably only seconds. He hit the bottom of the shaft hard, his rebuilt legs screaming in protest as he rolled across a floor of broken stone and debris. The impact drove the air from his lungs, and for a terrifying moment he couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but lie in the darkness and wonder if this was how his story would end. Above him, perhaps 30 feet up, Scout was barking frantically. The sound echoed strangely in the confined space, bouncing off stone walls and creating an acoustic chaos that made Tom's head spin. Weak sunlight filtered down through the hole he had created, revealing a rough circular chamber carved from the living rock. The air was stale and carried the metallic scent of old mining equipment mixed with something else, something organic and unpleasant that made Tom's combat-trained senses go on high alert. Tom lay still for several long minutes, waiting for his vision to clear and his breathing to return to normal. The familiar taste of adrenaline flooded his mouth, bringing back memories of similar moments in Iraq when death had seemed imminent. But this time, There were no enemy soldiers, no incoming mortar rounds, just the suffocating darkness of an underground tomb that might very well become his final resting place. Tom's first priority was to assess his injuries. His left leg was throbbing where the titanium implants had taken the brunt of the impact, but when he carefully tested his range of motion, everything seemed to be working properly. The rebuilding surgeons at Walter Reed had done excellent work. The artificial components of his leg had absorbed the shock better than the original bone and muscle would have. His right shoulder was scraped raw where he had hit the wall during his fall, and he could feel the warm stickiness of blood seeping through his shirt. But he was alive, conscious, and apparently not seriously injured, which was more than he had any right to expect after a 30-foot fall into a mine shaft. The real problem was his situation. The mine shaft extended straight up for what looked like at least 30 feet, with smooth stone walls that offered no handholds for climbing. Even if his leg had been in perfect condition, Tom knew he would never be able to scale those walls unaided. His cell phone was miraculously unbroken, but the display showed no signal bars. He was trapped underground, with no way to call for help and no immediate means of escape. Scout's barking had taken on a different quality, still urgent, but more focused now. Tom looked up to see the dog's silhouette framed against the opening, and he could tell that Scout was trying to communicate something specific. During their military service, Scout had been trained to indicate different types of dangers with specific behaviors, and Tom had learned to interpret the subtle differences in his partner's alerts. "I'm okay, boy," Tom called up, his voice echoing weirdly in the confined space. "I'm okay, but I'm stuck down here. You need to go get help." But Scout didn't leave. Instead, the dog began barking in a pattern that Tom recognized from their bomb detection work. 3 short barks, a pause, then 2 longer barks. It was Scout's way of indicating that he had found something significant, something that required immediate attention. The pattern was as clear to Tom as spoken words, a language developed through years of partnership in life or death situations. Tom activated the flashlight app on his phone and began exploring his underground prison more systematically. The chamber was larger than he had initially realized, roughly circular and perhaps 15 feet across. The walls showed clear evidence of mining activity, tool marks, blast holes, and the remnants of wooden support structures that had long since rotted away. But there was something else, something that didn't belong in a coal mine. Set into the far wall of the chamber was what appeared to be a metal door, green with corrosion, but still intact. The design was distinctly military, heavy steel construction with reinforcing ribs and a wheel-type locking mechanism that Tom recognized from his service in Iraq. Someone had installed a military-grade security door in an abandoned coal mine, which made absolutely no sense unless there was something behind it worth protecting. The door was unlike anything Tom had seen in civilian mining operations. It was the kind of blast-resistant barrier used to protect ammunition storage areas or classified facilities. The wheel lock was corroded but appeared functional, and there were the remains of what looked like electronic security systems mounted around the frame. Someone had gone to enormous expense to secure whatever lay behind that door. Scout's barking became more insistent, and Tom realized the dog was trying to guide his attention to something specific. Following the direction of the sound, Tom aimed his phone's light at different sections of the chamber until Scout's barking changed to a satisfied whine. The light revealed a section of the wall where the stone had been deliberately carved into a series of footholds and handholds, a crude but effective climbing route that led up to a ledge about 10 feet above the chamber floor. Tom tested the carved holes carefully before committing his weight to them. His rebuilt leg protested every step of the climb, but the military-issue combat boots he still wore provided good traction on the rough stone. The ledge was narrow but solid, and it led to what appeared to be a horizontal tunnel extending back into the mountain. Unlike the rough-hewn chamber below, this tunnel showed signs of professional construction, smooth walls, proper ventilation, and the remains of electrical conduits that suggested sophisticated engineering. The tunnel was clearly artificial, cut through solid rock with precision that spoke of professional mining equipment. But the construction details were all wrong for a coal mine. The walls were too smooth, the ceiling too high, and there were the remnants of electrical conduits and ventilation systems that suggested a much more sophisticated operation than simple coal extraction. This looked more like the kind of underground facility that Tom had seen during military briefings about hardened command bunkers and weapons storage sites. Tom called up to Scout, who was still visible at the top of the shaft. "I've found something, boy. I'm going to check it out, but I need you to stay there and keep watch, okay? If anyone comes, you bark like crazy." Scout whined but settled down at the edge of the opening, his intelligent eyes tracking Tom's movements. As the veteran disappeared into the horizontal tunnel, the dog understood the command and would maintain his position, alert for any sign of danger from above. It was a routine they had practiced countless times during military operations, when Tom needed to investigate potential threats while Scout provided early warning of approaching enemies. Tom moved slowly and carefully through the tunnel, testing each step and using his phone's light to scan for potential dangers. The passage extended straight back into the mountain for perhaps 50 yards, before opening into another chamber, this one much larger than the mine shaft below. What he found there challenged everything he thought he knew about the abandoned mining site. The space was enormous, a natural cavern that had been expanded and modified with obvious military precision. The walls were lined with concrete, and the remains of electrical systems suggested the chamber had once been fully lit and ventilated. The ceiling soared at least 20 feet above his head, supported by steel beams that bore military specification markings. This wasn't just a mine shaft or storage area. It was a full-scale underground facility that had been designed for long-term occupation. But it was the contents of the chamber that truly shocked Tom. Arranged throughout the space were dozens of wooden crates, their surfaces stenciled with military markings that he recognized from his own service. Some bore the eagle insignia of the U.S. Army, while others carried markings in German that he couldn't immediately translate. In the center of the chamber sat several large metal objects covered by rotting canvas tarps, their shapes suggesting sophisticated equipment of some kind. Along one wall, Tom discovered what appeared to be living quarters, the remains of bunk beds, a kitchen area, and even a small library filled with technical manuals and scientific journals. Someone had lived in this underground facility for an extended period, treating it as a base of operations rather than just a storage site. The personal touches, coffee cups, playing cards, family photographs, suggested that the occupants had tried to make the sterile environment as comfortable as possible. Tom approached the nearest crate and carefully pried off the lid with his multi-tool. Inside, packed in oiled cloth and straw, were military weapons, rifles, pistols, and what appeared to be explosives, all in pristine condition despite their obvious age. The serial numbers and manufacturer's markings indicated they were American weapons from the World War II era, but they had been maintained with a care that suggested ongoing use rather than simple storage. The metal objects under the tarps proved to be even more intriguing. When Tom pulled away the rotting canvas, he revealed what appeared to be scientific equipment, precision instruments, laboratory apparatus, and several devices he couldn't immediately identify. Everything was marked with both German and English labels, and there were technical diagrams covered in plastic sheeting that showed detailed schematics for various pieces of equipment. One device in particular caught Tom's attention. It was roughly the size of a desk, constructed from what appeared to be specially hardened steel, with multiple viewing ports and mechanical manipulators that suggested it was designed for handling dangerous materials. The German markings on its surface included warnings about radiation and chemical hazards, while the English labels bore the seal of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. But it was the discovery of a metal filing cabinet that truly began to unravel the mystery. The cabinet was locked, but the mechanism was corroded enough that Tom was able to force it open with his multi-tool. Inside were hundreds of documents, reports, and photographs that painted a picture of a covert operation that had been hidden from history for more than 70 years. According to the files, the chamber had been part of Operation Paperclip, the secret American program to capture German scientists and technology at the end of World War II. But this particular site wasn't mentioned in any of the official documents Tom had read about the operation. It appeared to be an off-the-books storage facility, where the most sensitive captured materials had been hidden away from public scrutiny and even from other government agencies. The documents detailed the transportation of German rocket technology, advanced metallurgy research, and experimental weapons systems to various secret locations throughout the United States. The West Virginia site had been chosen because of its remote location and the existing mining infrastructure that could provide perfect camouflage for the covert operation. Coal mines were dangerous places that most people avoided, making them ideal for concealing classified activities. Tom spent nearly an hour reading through the files, trying to piece together the full scope of what had been hidden in the mountain. According to the records, the site had been active from 1946 to 1952, when it was suddenly abandoned following the death of the project's commanding officer in a car accident. The remaining personnel had simply sealed the chamber and left, apparently taking the secret of its location to their graves. Among the most intriguing documents was a personal journal kept by the facility's chief scientist, a former German rocket engineer named Dr. Klaus Weber, who had been brought to America under the Paperclip program. Weber's journal entries revealed his conflicted feelings about working for his former enemies, his guilt over the weapons he had helped create for the Nazi regime, and his growing determination to ensure that his research would be used for peaceful purposes. The journal painted a picture of a man tortured by his past, but determined to make amends for his role in the Nazi war machine. Weber had been one of the scientists involved in developing the V-2 rockets that had terrorized London, but he had also witnessed the horrors of the concentration camps and the slave labor used to build his weapons. His decision to defect to the Americans had been motivated not by opportunism, but by a genuine desire to use his knowledge to prevent future wars. The entries detailed Weber's growing suspicion that his American handlers were more interested in developing new weapons than in the peaceful applications of rocket technology that he had been promised. He described heated arguments with military officials who wanted to use his research for ballistic missiles and space-based weapons systems. As his disillusionment grew, Weber had begun making secret modifications to his work, building in safeguards and hidden flaws that would prevent his designs from being used for their intended military purposes. The final entry in Weber's journal was dated just days before the facility was abandoned. In it, he described his decision to sabotage certain key documents and equipment to prevent them from being used for military purposes. He had hidden the most dangerous research in a separate location within the facility, protected by security measures that would require both scientific knowledge and military expertise to overcome. "I have created a monster," Weber had written in his precise handwriting, "but I will not allow it to devour the world. The knowledge I have gained must be preserved for future generations, but only those who understand both its power and its dangers should be permitted to access it. I have therefore created a test, a series of challenges that will ensure that only someone with both technical understanding and moral courage will be able to uncover what I have hidden." As Tom read these words, Scout's barking from above took on a new urgency. The dog was no longer using his standard alert patterns. Instead, his barks were sharp and continuous, the sound he made when strangers were approaching. Tom quickly gathered up the most important documents and stuffed them into his jacket, then made his way back through the tunnel to the vertical shaft. Looking up, Tom could see that Scout was no longer alone at the opening. Several human figures were silhouetted against the sky, and their voices carried down the shaft with the harsh echo of authority. Tom recognized the tone immediately. These were people accustomed to giving orders and having them obeyed without question. "Definitely someone down there," a gruff male voice was saying. "The dog's been barking for over an hour, and we've found fresh boot prints leading to the edge. Plus there's broken timber all around the opening. Could be hunters or hikers," a second voice replied. This one female with a slight accent Tom couldn't place. "This area's supposed to be off limits, but people ignore the signs all the time. Probably some kid fell through and got himself trapped." "Maybe," the first voice said doubtfully, "but the timing's suspicious. We've had chatter about people asking questions, poking around where they shouldn't be. That historian from the university was sniffing around last month, asking about wartime activities in the area. If someone's found the site, then we deal with it," the woman interrupted. "Same as always, no witnesses, no evidence, no problems. The operation's been secure for 70 years, and it's going to stay that way." Tom felt a chill that had nothing to do with the underground temperature. These people knew about the hidden chamber, and they were willing to kill to protect its secrets. He was trapped at the bottom of a mine shaft with no way to escape and no way to call for help. Scout was the only thing standing between him and whatever these people had planned. The conversation above continued, and Tom was able to piece together more details about the situation. The group seemed to be some kind of security team, tasked with protecting the secrets of the underground facility. They had been monitoring the area for decades, eliminating anyone who came too close to discovering the truth. The historian from the university they had mentioned was probably Professor Elizabeth Morrison from West Virginia University, who had been researching Cold War activities in the region before her sudden death in a car accident 6 weeks ago. As if sensing his master's thoughts, Scout suddenly launched himself away from the edge of the shaft. Tom heard shouts of surprise and alarm from above, followed by the sounds of a struggle. Scout was buying him time, but Tom knew his loyal partner couldn't hold off multiple attackers for long. The Belgian Malinois was a formidable fighter, but he was outnumbered, and the attackers probably had weapons. Tom looked around the chamber desperately, searching for anything that might help him escape or defend himself. The military equipment in the hidden chamber might include weapons, but it would take time to get back through the tunnel and locate something useful. Time he probably didn't have if Scout was in immediate danger. Then he remembered something from Dr. Weber's journal, the German scientist's mention of security measures and hidden passages. Weber had been paranoid about discovery, and he had built multiple escape routes into his secret facility. If Tom could find one of those passages, he might be able to escape the shaft without using the obvious route that his captors were watching. Tom made his way back up the carved footholds to the ledge, then hurried through the tunnel to the main chamber. This time, he examined the walls more carefully, looking for any sign of concealed openings or hidden mechanisms. Dr. Weber had been a rocket engineer. He would have thought like an engineer, building redundant systems and backup plans into everything he designed. The breakthrough came when Tom noticed that one section of the chamber wall didn't match the others. The concrete was slightly different in color and texture, as if it had been poured at a different time or with different materials. When he pressed against it, the wall gave slightly, revealing that it was actually a carefully disguised door. The craftsmanship was extraordinary. Without close examination, the false wall was virtually indistinguishable from the surrounding concrete. The mechanism that opened the door was typically German in its precision engineering. A series of concealed buttons had to be pressed in the correct sequence, based on a mathematical formula that Weber had hidden in his journal notes. Tom had always been good with numbers, a skill that had served him well during his military service when calculating explosive charges and trajectory calculations, and he was able to decode Weber's system after several minutes of careful work. The sequence was based on the Fibonacci series, but modified with a factor derived from Weber's birth date and the atomic number of uranium. It was the kind of elegant mathematical puzzle that would appeal to a rocket scientist while remaining virtually impossible for anyone without the proper knowledge to solve. Weber had clearly spent considerable time designing security measures that would protect his secrets from casual discovery while allowing access to those who possessed both intelligence and determination. The hidden door swung open silently, revealing another tunnel that angled upward through the mountain. This passage was narrower than the main tunnel, but it showed the same precise engineering that characterized all of Weber's work. Emergency lighting strips were still mounted along the walls, though they had long since ceased to function. The tunnel had been designed as an escape route, allowing the facility's occupants to evacuate quickly if the main entrance was compromised. Tom followed the escape tunnel for what felt like hours, but was probably only about 30 minutes. The passage branched several times, creating a maze that would have been impossible to navigate without Weber's detailed maps, which Tom had found among the documents in the filing cabinet. The German engineer had been thorough in his planning, creating multiple routes that emerged at different points around the mountain. The tunnel walls were smooth and straight, cut through solid rock with the kind of precision that required expensive equipment and skilled operators. Every few hundred yards, Tom encountered blast doors that had been left open but could have sealed off sections of the tunnel system in case of emergency. The level of engineering involved was staggering. This wasn't just a simple escape route, but a sophisticated underground transportation network that probably connected to other facilities throughout the region. The tunnel Tom had chosen emerged through a concealed entrance in a grove of pine trees about a mile from the original mine shaft. The opening was hidden behind a screen of carefully planted vegetation that had grown wild in the decades since the facility was abandoned. Tom emerged into bright afternoon sunlight, his eyes struggling to adjust after hours in the underground darkness. His first priority was Scout. Tom could hear his partner's barks echoing from the direction of Devil's Hollow, but the sounds were fainter now, suggesting that the confrontation had moved away from the immediate area of the mine shaft. Tom circled around through the forest, using the cover of the trees to approach the abandoned mining site from an unexpected direction. What he found when he reached the edge of the clearing made his blood run cold. 3 black SUVs were parked near the mine shaft, their government license plates barely visible through layers of mud and dust. A helicopter sat in the clearing where the old mining equipment had been stored, its rotors still slowly spinning as if the crew was prepared for a quick departure. The vehicles and aircraft all bore the kind of nondescript markings that screamed government black ops to anyone with military experience. Scout was nowhere to be seen, but Tom could hear his barks coming from inside one of the SUVs. The dog was alive, but captured, probably sedated or restrained to prevent him from escaping. Around the vehicles, Tom counted at least 8 people in dark clothing, their movements and equipment suggesting military or intelligence backgrounds. They moved with the kind of professional confidence that came from years of covert operations. Tom recognized the type immediately. He had worked with similar teams during his service in Iraq. These were specialists in covert operations, people who were accustomed to operating outside normal legal channels. The fact that they had arrived so quickly after his discovery suggested they had been monitoring the area, possibly for years. They probably had motion sensors, surveillance cameras, and other security measures throughout the mountain that had alerted them to his presence. The woman's voice he had heard earlier belonged to a tall, thin figure in tactical gear who seemed to be in charge of the operation. She was consulting what appeared to be ground-penetrating radar equipment, probably trying to locate the hidden chamber that Tom had discovered. The fact that they didn't already know its exact location suggested that the secret had been well kept for more than 70 years. known only to a select few who had maintained their silence. Tom's military training kicked in as he assessed the tactical situation. He was outnumbered 8-1, with no weapons except his multi-tool and no backup except whatever resources he could improvise from the forest around him. But he had advantages that his opponents didn't know about. Detailed knowledge of the underground facility, possession of Weber's maps and documents, and most importantly, the element of surprise. They thought he was trapped at the bottom of a mine shaft, not watching them from the tree line. The documents he had taken from the filing cabinet were potentially explosive, containing evidence of illegal government operations that had been hidden from Congress and the American people for decades. If Tom could get that information to the right people, journalists, congressional investigators, or civil rights organizations, it could expose a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of the intelligence community. But first, he had to rescue Scout. The Belgian Malinois had saved Tom's life countless times during their military service, and Tom wasn't about to abandon his partner now. Whatever these people had planned for Scout, and for him, Tom was determined to prevent it. Tom spent the next hour conducting reconnaissance, using skills he had learned during urban warfare training in Iraq. He mapped the positions of the sentries, identified the command structure of the operation, and located potential weak points in their security perimeter. The team was professional, but not perfect. They were focused on the mine shaft and the underground facility, not on the possibility of threats from the surrounding forest. The leader of the operation was clearly the woman Tom had heard giving orders earlier. She was perhaps 45 years old, with steel-grey hair pulled back in a severe bun, and the kind of cold, calculating eyes that suggested she had seen and done things that would give normal people nightmares. Her tactical gear was top of the line, and she carried herself with the authority of someone accustomed to command. The rest of the team consisted of 6 men and 1 other woman, all carrying military-grade weapons and communication equipment. They moved with the fluid coordination of a unit that had worked together for years, anticipating each other's actions and maintaining constant awareness of their surroundings. These weren't hired mercenaries or local security guards. They were federal agents or military personnel operating under deep cover. The opportunity Tom had been waiting for came when the team leader decided to send 2 of her people down into the mine shaft to investigate the chamber Tom had discovered. The operation required most of their attention and manpower, leaving only a skeleton crew to guard the vehicles and equipment on the surface. Tom watched as they rigged climbing equipment and prepared to rappel into the shaft, their movement suggesting they had done this kind of operation many times before. Tom approached the SUV containing Scout from the blind spot created by the helicopter's bulk. The vehicle was running, probably to power whatever equipment they were using to keep Scout sedated, and Tom could hear his partner's weak whines from inside. The dog was alive but clearly drugged, which explained why he hadn't already chewed through his restraints and escaped. Scout's combat training had included resistance to chemical agents, but even his enhanced metabolism couldn't completely overcome whatever they had used to subdue him. The rear door of the SUV was locked, but Tom had learned lockpicking techniques during his military service that served him well in civilian life. The electronic locks were more sophisticated than the mechanical ones he was used to, but the basic principles remained the same. Within seconds, he had the door open and was reaching inside to free his partner. Scout's eyes were glassy from whatever drug they had given him, but the dog recognized Tom immediately and tried to wag his tail despite his obvious disorientation. The Belgian Malinois had been secured with heavy-duty restraints that were designed for handling dangerous animals, but Tom's multi-tool included a wire cutter that made quick work of the bindings. Tom carefully lifted Scout from the vehicle, noting that the dog's legs were wobbly but functional. Whatever they had used to sedate him was wearing off, which meant Tom needed to get them both away from the area before Scout's absence was discovered. The dog was too unsteady to run, but he could walk if Tom supported some of his weight. They had made it perhaps 50 yards into the forest when shouts erupted from the clearing behind them. Someone had discovered Scout's escape, and within seconds the entire team was mobilizing for pursuit. Tom could hear the helicopter's engines spooling up and the harsh crackle of radio communications as the team coordinated their search efforts. Tom knew they couldn't outrun a helicopter and a coordinated ground search, especially with Scout still impaired by whatever drug they had used. But he had one advantage that his pursuers didn't know about. Weber's escape tunnel system extended throughout the mountain, with multiple entrances and exits that weren't marked on any modern maps. If he could reach one of the hidden entrances, they could disappear underground, where the helicopter would be useless, and the pursuit team would have to split up to cover all the possible exit points. Tom half-carried, half-dragged Scout to the nearest tunnel entrance, which was concealed beneath a fallen log about 200 yards from the main facility. The opening was barely large enough for a man to crawl through, but it connected to the larger tunnel system that Tom had explored earlier. Once they were underground, the helicopter would be useless, and the pursuit team would have to split up to cover all the possible exit points. The next several hours were a nightmare of underground navigation, with Tom carrying Scout through narrow passages and cramped chambers while listening for sounds of pursuit behind them. The dog was gradually recovering from the sedative, but he was still too weak to travel under his own power for extended periods. Tom's rebuilt leg was screaming in protest from the additional weight and the uneven footing, but he pushed through the pain with the determination of a soldier who had learned that survival often depended on ignoring physical discomfort. Weber's tunnel system was even more extensive than Tom had initially realized. The passages extended for miles through the mountain, connecting not just to the main facility, but to several smaller installations that had apparently been used for different aspects of the secret operation. Some tunnels led to observation posts carved into the mountainside, while others opened into storage areas filled with equipment and supplies that had been abandoned when the project was terminated. Tom used Weber's maps to navigate to an exit point nearly 3 miles from the original mine shaft, emerging in a valley that was separated from Devil's Hollow by a ridge of mountains. By the time they reached the surface, Scout was mostly recovered and able to walk on his own, though he still showed signs of disorientation from the drugs. The Belgian Malinois shook his head repeatedly, as if trying to clear away the lingering effects of whatever they had used to subdue him. Tom's first priority was to get them both to safety and contact the authorities, but as he considered his options, he realized that the situation was more complicated than a simple case of trespassing or even kidnapping. The people who had captured Scout were clearly government agents of some kind, operating with resources and authority that suggested high-level backing. They had sophisticated equipment, military-grade weapons, and the kind of operational security that only came from extensive training and experience. If Tom went to local law enforcement, there was a good chance that his report would be buried or that he would simply disappear like so many other people who had stumbled onto classified operations. He needed to find someone with the authority and independence to investigate his claims, someone who couldn't be intimidated or bought off by intelligence agencies. The documents he had recovered from Weber's facility were his only leverage, but they would be worthless if he couldn't get them to someone who could act on the information they contained. The answer came to him as he remembered a news report he had seen several months earlier about a congressional investigation into historical CIA operations. Representative Sarah Chen of California had been leading hearings on government accountability, specifically focusing on operations that had been conducted without proper oversight or legal authorization. She had earned a reputation as someone who couldn't be intimidated by the intelligence community, and her committee had the power to compel testimony and demand access to classified documents. Tom used his cell phone to look up Representative Chen's office number, but when he called, he was told that she was currently in West Virginia as part of a fact-finding tour related to her investigation. According to her aide, she was staying at a hotel in Charleston and would be available for meetings with constituents who had relevant information about historical government operations in the region. The drive to Charleston took Tom and Scout nearly 4 hours, partly because Tom took a circuitous route to make sure they weren't being followed. He stopped frequently to check for surveillance, using techniques he had learned during urban warfare training to detect potential tails. By the time they reached the hotel, it was nearly midnight, but Tom knew that time was critical. The longer he waited, the more likely it was that the people who had captured Scout would track them down. Representative Chen turned out to be a small, intense woman in her 50s, with the kind of sharp intelligence that had obviously served her well in Congress. Despite the late hour, she agreed to meet with Tom in her hotel suite after he convinced her aide that he had information relevant to her investigation. She listened to Tom's story with growing amazement, asking detailed questions about the documents he had found and the facility he had discovered. "This is exactly the kind of operation we've been investigating," she told Tom after reviewing copies of Weber's journal and the other documents. Illegal storage of classified materials, unauthorized continuation of terminated programs, use of government resources for activities that were never approved by Congress. If what you found is authentic, it could be the smoking gun we need to expose decades of illegal activity. Representative Chen immediately contacted the FBI's Domestic Terrorism Unit, but she also took the precaution of notifying several journalists and civil rights organizations about Tom's discovery. Her experience with government cover-ups had taught her that the only way to ensure the truth came out was to make sure it was impossible to suppress. She had seen too many whistleblowers silenced and too many investigations derailed by political pressure to take any chances with information this sensitive. The next few days were a whirlwind of interviews, debriefings, and federal investigations. Tom found himself at the center of a media storm as news of the hidden facility spread throughout the country. The documents he had recovered provided evidence of illegal weapons storage, unauthorized scientific experiments, and cover-ups that reached the highest levels of the intelligence community. Dr. Klaus Weber's journal proved to be particularly damaging to the agencies involved. The German scientist's detailed records showed that he had been coerced into continuing weapons research that violated international treaties, and that he had deliberately sabotaged some of his work to prevent it from being used for harmful purposes. His decision to hide the most dangerous research had probably prevented several potential disasters, including the development of chemical and biological weapons that would have violated the Geneva Convention. The journal also revealed the existence of other similar facilities throughout the United States, secret installations where captured German technology and scientists had been used for projects that were never authorized by Congress or disclosed to the American people. Weber's maps and documentation provided the FBI with leads that resulted in the discovery of additional hidden sites in Montana, Colorado, and New Mexico. The people who had captured Scout turned out to be part of a Black Ops unit that had been tasked with protecting the secrecy of various Cold War-era programs. They had been monitoring the Devil's Hollow area for years, waiting for someone to discover the hidden facility. Tom's fall into the mine shaft had triggered their response, but they had underestimated both his military training and his determination to protect his partner. Most of the Black Ops team was arrested during the federal raids that followed Tom's revelations, though several key figures managed to disappear before they could be taken into custody. The helicopter and vehicles Tom had seen were eventually traced to a front company that had been used to fund illegal operations for decades. The investigation revealed a web of corruption and illegal activity that stretched from the post-war period to the present day. For Tom, the aftermath of his discovery brought both vindication and new challenges. The substantial reward that Congress authorized for his assistance in exposing the illegal operations provided financial security he had never expected. But more importantly, The experience had given him a sense of purpose that had been missing since his discharge from the military. He had found a way to use his skills and experience in service of something greater than himself. Scout recovered completely from his ordeal, though the experience seemed to have sharpened the dog's already impressive protective instincts. The Belgian Malinois had always been devoted to Tom, but now there was an even deeper bond between them, forged in the underground darkness where they had depended on each other for survival. The dog's behavior during the crisis had probably saved both their lives, demonstrating once again why military working dogs were considered such valuable partners. Dr. Martinez at the VA hospital was amazed by the change in Tom's condition. The claustrophobia and panic attacks that had plagued him since his injury had largely disappeared, replaced by a confidence that came from having faced his fears and emerged victorious. The underground tunnels that should have been his prison had become the setting for his liberation, proving that sometimes the things we fear most can become the source of our greatest strength. Tom used part of his reward money to establish a foundation dedicated to helping other veterans transition to civilian life. He and Scout became regular speakers at VA hospitals and veteran support groups, sharing their story as an example of how the skills learned in military service could be valuable in unexpected ways. Their experience had shown that the training and instincts developed in combat could be just as important in civilian life as they had been on the battlefield. The hidden facility in Devil's Hollow was eventually turned into a museum and educational center, with Dr. Weber's journal and research serving as a reminder of the moral complexities that scientists and soldiers face during wartime. Tom served on the museum's board of directors, helping to ensure that the history preserved there would honor both the achievements and the mistakes of the past. The facility became a place where visitors could learn about the hidden history of the Cold War, while reflecting on the ethical implications of scientific research and government secrecy. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. 6 months after the discovery, Tom received a letter from Dr. Weber's grandson in Germany. The young man had read about Tom's discovery in international news reports and wanted to express his family's gratitude for finally bringing his grandfather's story to light. "My grandfather carried the weight of his wartime work for his entire life," the letter read. "He never spoke of what he had hidden in America, but we always knew he was troubled by secrets he couldn't share. Your courage in exposing the truth has finally allowed our family to understand his struggle and honor his memory properly." He would have been proud to know that his safeguards worked as intended, protecting his most dangerous research, until someone with both the knowledge and the moral courage to handle it responsibly could be found. As Tom stood once again at the edge of Devil's Hollow, now transformed into a place of learning rather than danger, he reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. A simple therapy hike had become an adventure that changed not only his own life, but potentially the lives of countless others who would learn from the history preserved in the mountain. The abandoned mine that had nearly become his tomb had instead become the key to unlocking secrets that had been hidden for more than 70 years. Scout sat beside him, the dog's amber eyes alert and content as he surveyed the valley below. The Belgian Malinois had led Tom through the darkness when escape seemed impossible, just as he had guided him away from hidden explosives in the deserts of Iraq. Their partnership had been forged in war and tempered in peace, creating a bond that would last for whatever adventures lay ahead. Tom pulled out his phone and called his sister Beth, who had been following the story in the news with a mixture of pride and worry. "How are you doing, little brother?" she asked, her voice warm with affection. "I'm good, Beth," Tom replied, watching Scout explore the familiar scents around the old mine entrance. "Really good. For the first time in years, I feel like I know exactly where I belong. As they walked back toward their truck, Tom thought about Dr. Weber's journal entry describing his hope that his research would someday be used for peaceful purposes. The German scientist had hidden his most dangerous discoveries to protect future generations, trusting that someday the right person would find them and make the right choices. Tom had been that person, guided by a loyal dog and driven by a soldier's sense of duty to do what was right, regardless of the personal cost. The mountain had kept its secrets for more than 70 years, but now those secrets would serve their intended purpose, not as weapons of war, but as lessons for peace. The underground facility that had once housed dangerous research had become a place of education and remembrance, ensuring that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated in the future. Scout barked once, a sound of contentment and satisfaction that echoed off the surrounding hills. Together, they climbed into the truck and drove away from Devil's Hollow, two veterans who had found their way home through the darkness underground and emerged into a brighter future above. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time since his injury, Tom felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, secure in the knowledge that he and Scout would face them together.